The ghost that followed me from the funeral. The funeral. I had always heard whispers about funerals, how the veil between the living and the dead thins during them. But I never believed in any of that until that day. The day I went to the funeral of my great-uncle, a man I barely knew. It was an old, quiet ceremony in a cemetery on the outskirts of town. The place was ancient, with graves so old that the stone had worn away, and the earth itself seemed to absorb the light. The air felt thicker than usual, as if something unseen was watching us. As we walked past the grave, a chill ran up my spine. I felt the weight of eyes on me, eyes that weren't human. I turned, expecting to see someone from the family, but no one was looking at me. It was as if the gaze had come from somewhere deeper, somewhere beyond the grave. I shook it off, thinking it was just nerves. But the strangest thing happened that night. As the ceremony ended, I noticed an old woman in the corner of the graveyard, her face obscured by a veil. She was staring directly at me. Something about her posture. It wasn't human, not quite. The way she swayed as though she were barely standing on the earth, her movements too fluid, too unnatural. When our eyes met, I felt my blood run cold. There was something wrong about her, something I couldn't place. But then she smiled, slowly, unnaturally, her lips peeling back to reveal blackened teeth, like the smile of someone who had not smiled in decades, centuries even. I quickly looked away, telling myself it was just my imagination. Yet, as we left the cemetery, I felt that same icy feeling, like something was walking right behind me, so close I could feel its breath on my neck. That night, the nightmares began. I woke up in the dead of night, my room suffocatingly still. It felt wrong. I opened my eyes, staring into the pitch-black darkness. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, a voice so soft, so subtle, it almost seemed like a part of the night itself. It was a voice that seemed to echo through my very bones, a voice that knew me, had always known me. And then, from the corner of the room, a shape slowly emerged. A shadow that moved like liquid smoke, swirling and twisting, shifting in a way no human body ever could. I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My entire body was paralyzed, as if it were being held in place by invisible hands. The shadow crept closer, and I heard the words, "You should have never come." The terror that coursed through me was unlike anything I had ever felt. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, aware of my every thought, my every fear. It wasn't just a presence. It was an entity, a thing that knew what was coming, a thing that had always known. I wanted to run, to escape, but my body betrayed me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only watch as the shadow approached, its presence becoming more solid with each passing second, until it was standing directly above me. I could feel its cold, unnatural weight pressing down on me, and in that moment I understood. The woman from the cemetery, she was no longer a mere memory. She had followed me. I gasped, finally breaking free from the paralysis, but the shadow didn't vanish. Instead, it lingered, clinging to the corners of the room, watching, waiting. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping against hope that when I opened them, it would be gone. But when I opened them, it was still there. And it was smiling. The smile was not a smile of joy. It was something far darker, a promise of things to come. A promise I could not escape. I tried to leave, tried to scream, but the words caught in my throat as if something was stopping me. Something was holding me here, tethered to this nightmare. The shadow spoke again, the words cutting through me like ice. "You are mine now." That was when I realized the truth. I had invited something far darker into my life, something that would never leave. It wasn't a curse, it wasn't a bad dream, it was far worse. It was the kind of nightmare that never ends, the kind of nightmare that follows you everywhere, no matter how far you run. But what happens when the nightmare doesn't end? To find out, subscribe now. The Haunting. I wish I could tell you the nightmare ended when I woke up. That somehow the shadow would dissipate with the dawn, that my life would return to normal. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. The next morning I thought I had gotten away. I left my house, walked outside, trying to shake off the lingering feeling of being watched. But it followed. Not in any way I could explain. It was a presence that clung to me, creeping into every crevice of my thoughts, every shadow I passed. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I could feel it. The thing, the woman, that ancient evil from the graveyard, moving closer and closer. I wasn't alone. I was never alone. At work I felt it. The whispers. It was subtle, like a hum just on the edge of hearing. It made my skin crawl. Every time I looked in the reflection of a window, I saw her standing behind me, her eyes glowing with that same sickening smile. But when I turned around, nothing. It was as if she could only exist in the reflection, mocking me, always just out of reach. That afternoon, I made the mistake of picking up the phone. It was an unknown number. When I answered, there was no voice on the other end, just a deep, ragged breathing as if something was listening. Then the whisper, "You belong to me now." My heart stopped. I dropped the phone, my breath shallow. The room seemed to close in on me. The lights flickered, the air grew thick, and my body felt like it was suffocating under the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. I tried to leave, to escape, to flee to any safe place. But the moment I stepped outside, I saw her. The woman from the graveyard. Standing at the edge of the street, just beyond the light. She was watching me, and I knew, deep in my bones, that she was more than a mere ghost. She was something older, something far worse. Something that had been waiting. I tried to run. I bolted down the street, but it was as if the world had shifted. The ground beneath me became a blur, the buildings and roads twisting, bending into shapes that didn't belong. Nothing was real anymore. The world had become her playground, and I was the prey. I could hear her now, closer than ever, her footsteps echoing behind me, a rhythmic thud that matched the frantic beat of my heart. But when I turned around, nothing. There was nothing there. Except the whisper, cold and raspy, curling into my ear, "Run all you want. I'm already inside you." It was then that I understood. I hadn't just seen her that day at the funeral. I had invited her. By being there, by witnessing her, I had let her in. And now she was part of me, haunting every thought, every corner of my existence. And then, everything went still. The street, the air, the world itself. I stood frozen, my mind screaming for me to run, but my body refusing to move. The shadows gathered, darker and thicker than ever before, creeping across the ground like ink spilled from a broken bottle. And then I saw it. Her face just a few inches from mine. Her eyes wide and black, no longer human. The smile stretched impossibly far, showing rows of teeth that weren't teeth at all. The skin around her mouth pulled back, the flesh rotting away as though time itself had forgotten her. "You thought it was a curse," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "But it's a bond. You and I are connected now. Forever." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My body was frozen, but I could feel her presence inside me, curling like a sickness in my chest. Her voice echoed in my mind, louder and louder, until I couldn't tell where she ended and I began. Then, in one horrifying moment, I felt it, like a hand slipping inside my chest, tearing through me, pulling my very soul from my body. I watched, helpless, as my own reflection twisted into her face, her smile consuming everything. And then it was over. But it wasn't. The world went black, and I felt the cold touch of the graveyard again, the weight of the earth pressing down on me. Her whispers, once a distant hum, became a constant, never-ending presence in my mind. Her eyes, those black pits of nothingness, are always there watching. So, if you hear this story, if you listen, know this, you too are marked. You too have heard her. And now, she knows you. You're not alone. But before you go, remember, subscribe to my channel. You're not safe until you do.